I'm going to tell you how I got my jobs in architecture. Listen, I am not an architect. I am a Part 2 architectural assistant. I have not sat my Part 3 exam, but you guys want to know how I landed my last 2 jobs in architecture, so I'm going to share it. I got my first Part 1 architectural assistant job that was 10 minutes away from me by calling them. That's it. My second Part 1 architectural assistant job, I got it because I called them. Literally, that was it. I called them. When I finished my graduate degree, it was COVID. And yeah, there was companies hiring, but let's be real, the companies are receiving hundreds of applications. The chances and the ratio of them picking your project, picking your portfolio, liking your name, that part, is very slim. So I kind of realized quickly that if I want to get a job in architecture, I need to have a different way of doing it. So my strategy was basically to make a list of about 50 practices in my city, and I did it on Excel, and I literally just went on Google Maps and I had my pin for where I lived, and then I put in architecture practices or architecture companies, and I kind of zoomed out, and then I was able to see in the surrounding areas where all the architecture practices were. And a lot of them were small practices. I live in a suburb basically, so I'm not in the city centre, I'm not in London, I'm up north, so there aren't that many architecture firms, and the architecture firms that there are around me are so small that either they don't take Part 1s or they have 2 Part 1s. Do you know what I mean? So it's not the easiest. So my strategy was to build up my skills to a point that I could sell myself. So through university, I learned how to use Vectorworks, and I learned how to use a rendering software and Rhino as well. And when I was then calling companies, I was able to pitch that to them. So when I had my 50 practices there, I went through and I said, "Hi there, I hope you're well. These are my skills. This is how I can help you. I want to get my foot in the door. Is there any opportunities available?" And for my first job, the person that answered the phone was an assistant at first, and then they said, "Call back another day and I'll get you on the phone to the senior architect." A couple of days later, I spoke to the senior architect, and then he, asked me to come in for a meeting. I had a meeting with him. He was like, "I need to see some 3D models." Because Vectorworks, you can produce 3D models, but I hadn't really had any clean 3D models. If you're an architecture student, you make the 3D model to produce the 2D drawings. So my 3D models were higgy hagger. They weren't clean, so I didn't want to put it in my portfolio but the feedback from that interview was get some 3D models in there, and then I'm going to put you up for an interview with the director. So I went home, built some 3D models, some clean ones, just simple. I did it in my house. I called him back, and then he was kind of wishy-washy with me even. He was like, "Okay, the director ain't in yet, call back then." So I think it was about the process of a month of me following up. And bear in mind, it's a small practice, less than 10 people. So I was calling up, and then eventually I got my interview with the director. And so she obviously knew as a Part 1, I didn't really have the skill set that they needed, because she was like, "If we're going to hire someone, it's either going to be a Part 2 or a qualified architect." So she was like, "Let's make a list of what your skills are and how you can help me." And some of the skills were that I can, produce 2D floor plans. They were using MicroStation. I'd used Vectorworks, they're not too dissimilar. I can go and measure houses, and from measuring houses, I can then create 2D floor plans from that, which they tend to call, when you go and measure a house and you draw it, you normally call that a site survey. So one of my roles was to be doing all the site surveys. Another one of my roles was to be doing all the project organization. So when a new project is set up on the computer, you organize the folders, you title it, you give it a date, you give it a number. They had over 500 projects. So, it was a lot of numbers there. And then, when it came to the contracts, I was putting out the contracts, I was editing the contracts, And so we kind of came up with a bulleted list of what my deliverables would be, and that was my part 1 architectural assistant job. And you know, I did a bit of office management and stuff like that then, which I even like now finished my part 2. I've gone back to help her a little bit with that, but that job came about because I was like, it's COVID, nowhere is hiring. I need to get my foot in the door. I need a different strategy here, and that's what I did. And it sounds simple, it wasn't easy. I felt so down, guys. Like, I literally finished my undergrad, COVID happened, I was at home for like 3 months, and then I went back to my retail job in H&M for a couple months, and I was like, because at that point I was applying for like traditional, you know, through company websites, whatever, and I wasn't hearing nothing. And I think I had an interview with Arcadis, that didn't go very well, and that was for a landscape designer role, and that was a rejection. So I was in H&M folding clothes, and I was like, I need a different strategy. So I was like, let me call up my local people, and as I said, I called them, and then, you know, a month later it all kind of worked out from there. And I know that this strategy works because there's another girl who messaged me having the same issue. I told her what I did, and she got a job from it, from doing what I did, which was making a list based on your location, calling every single one of them, having a pitch on that phone call of what your skills and your values are, how you can help the practice, and then making sure that you polish your portfolio for the interview. I applied that same strategy to get my second part 1 job, because I did my undergrad, did a year out at the practice I just talked about, went to start my masters, did another year out because I wanted more experience and I wanted more money, because masters is not cheap. And when I took that year out, my mum and dad were like, just finish your masters off, because it's a 2-year masters. They were like, finish it off, just get it done. But I was like, no, like, I want a first. And I finished my first year masters with like a 2-2, and I don't want to give excuses, and I just finished a 2-2, and I didn't want a 2-2, and I was like, no, I want to get a first, and I knew to get that first I needed some experience. I needed to see how projects worked, I needed to be able to use Revit, I needed to be able to get back with rendering, whatever. So I applied that same strategy. I think I knew I wanted to take another year out like in July time. So from July till October, I was just like calling practices, whatever. And then I think it was October time where I called a practice that again was like half an hour walk from my house. And I just sold myself. I really sold myself. And you realize that the more you sell yourself and the more you do interviews, the more better you get at it anyway. So I called them up. It was like an afternoon, 2 p.m. and I just said, hiya, these are my skills. I really am just trying to get my foot in the door as a part 1. I've got a bit of experience behind me. I think I can help you guys out. And the same thing happened. And that process was a little bit easier because I had something on my CV compared to the first time. So if you want to get a part 1 architecture assistant job, or even a part 2 architecture assistant job, don't just rely on applying to these, you know, big companies, small companies online. Try to call practices and be like relatable and personable to them, and it can work. And I will say that my most recent job, my part 2 job, that was through a recruiter, but I think I only got to that point because I put in the work earlier on of really getting to know like which practices were around in my city, and then I kind of had some knowledge of how I wanted to go about my part 2 role. So that's my advice if you want to get a part 1 architectural assistant job. Hope that helps.